Welcome to the All for Literacy podcast, hosted by Dr. Liz Brooke, welcoming established and emerging voices in literacy education and the science of reading. Explore with us the connections between literacy research, educators' knowledge and skills, and the implementation into classroom instruction.
When you're trying to establish and scale a vision for implementation, you have to consider so many factors.
You just heard Casey Sullivan Taylor, the Policy Director for Early Literacy for ExcelinEd. Today, Casey joins Dr. Liz Brooke in a conversation about the next steps as we shift from spreading awareness of the science of reading to supporting sustainable and effective implementation through policy and professional development. Here's your host, Dr. Liz Brooke.
Thank you for joining us today on the All for Literacy podcast. We're coming together to connect new and established research with the educators who apply those ideas daily in our schools. And as we work to improve access to effective literacy education, it's essential that information and conversation flow both ways, from research to the classroom and from classroom experience back to the researchers. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Casey Sullivan Taylor, the Policy Director for Early Literacy for ExcelinEd, and a former reading teacher, interventionist, and literacy coach. Welcome, Casey, and thanks for spending some time with me today.
Thank you so much, Liz. It's my pleasure to join you, and I thank you for the invitation to be a part of the conversation today.
Absolutely. I always like to start with my guests by asking them what inspired your interest in education as a profession.
Well, that's a little bit of a circuitous route for me. I grew up in a family where almost all of the females are educators of some type, and many of the males are as well. So when college time came, I actually tried very hard to pursue something different and got a bachelor's degree in psychology and business. And as soon as I finished and graduated, I moved overseas and I taught ESL for Japanese students who wanted to learn English. ESL was English as a second language. So then when I came back to the States and was doing some graduate work, I realized that really is where my passion was. And so I continued to work with speakers of other languages who wanted to learn English. And that transitioned then into working with some community programs in the city where I was, and then to the public schools where initially I worked with some 21st century after school programs, establishing that. And then I became a reading teacher. The principal said, I need to put you in my classroom. I need you to teach reading, help our students. And I went and I loved it. And I found that a lot of my strategies for English as a second language learners actually worked really well with some of my struggling readers. But I also found that there were gaps, and I really became passionate about trying to learn how to fill those gaps for students.
Wow, I love that. And I'm similar. My mom was a teacher for 40 years. In fact, we were one of the first mother-daughter teacher combos in the district that we taught in. But I can understand, and I'm glad that for our educators across the country and our students that you you followed your heart and entered into education. So what motivated you? Because when I first met you, I don't know, over 10 years ago, maybe now, you were working at the Mississippi DOE, and I know you've since been at the North Carolina DOE as well. So what motivated you to move from the classroom and the school level or the district level to the state DOE?
Really an opportunity when Mississippi advanced the legislative efforts, the Literacy-Based Promotion Act to support literacy. It was just such a wonderful opportunity to help the state advance that work and to make a difference in more than one classroom or more than one district. I was serving in an intervention and literacy coach role in a district at the time, and actually was encouraged by our curriculum director to apply for the position with MDE. She thought she was going to get to share me with the state in the beginning because of their educator in residence model, but it didn't turn out quite that way. But it was an opportunity to be a part of an initiative that has proven to be much more than we ever dreamed. Honestly, initially the plan was for the work to be funded for 3 years. It was still contingent upon annual approval. And now they're over 10 years later, and they're still continuing that work and striving for sustainability. And so just the chance to be a part of something that proved to be so instrumental in making changes across the state. We had a dream, and it's been really exciting to see that dream progress.
Wow. Well, and not only across the state, but across the country, because Mississippi is often held up as the example of tremendous impact of what the implementation of the science of reading can have on literacy rates. And I know it's often referred to as the Mississippi miracle. And it's very much not a miracle. It was very much very hard work. So I do want to have you be able to respond to that idea of what is really involved in that hard work and that change, because we know it was not a miracle. It was a hard work by lots of folks over many, many years, right? So,
well, those of us who have been a part of the work really like to call it the Mississippi Marathon, more so
that.
than the miracle, because it still is a long distance race and an effort that my former colleagues and those who have come since I've left, they are still striving continuously to grow and to make changes and continue to that improvement, and ensure that every child has the opportunity to be a strong reader. But I would say that some of the lessons that I learned from that experience, there were many, but just to name a few, a well-communicated vision is key to any important work that we do. And we had the advantage of having strong leaders who helped and all got on the same page, in the same boat, per se. And so perhaps rowing in the same direction, when you have all of those different stakeholders buy into that vision, and then they're all striving to move in the same direction, it makes all the difference. I think also I learned from the coaching initiative that I was a part of that everybody benefits from a coach. And I don't want to ever get to a place in life, in my career, where I feel like I have arrived, because we all still have opportunities to learn. And being a coach and having others who coached me or mentored me also made a huge impact. And I grew tremendously in my knowledge and in my skills as a part of that initiative. And then finally, continuous learning and improvement are critical. One of the things that I really loved about our team in Mississippi was that we tried to really assess where we are, where we're going, what have we done well, what can we do better. We would often use a SWOT analysis to look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and continually analyzing what can we do to improve from where we are. And I know the team still does that even now. They continuously look at all the gains that have been made, but they're not done. They're still striving for excellence.
Absolutely. And we had your former and current colleague, Dr. Kimyana Burke, on in season 1 talking about it. And you both talked about the importance of, well, that it was a marathon. I love that, changing it from the Mississippi Miracle to Mississippi Marathon, but also the comprehensive nature, that ongoing progress monitoring. And I know, again, I mentioned you went from Mississippi to North Carolina. And did you bring some of those learnings there? And how did your work in Mississippi impact your work that you did in North Carolina?
Absolutely. I took lessons with me there. When I arrived in North Carolina in 2019, it was under a different superintendent than the one who's currently in office, and there will be another change coming up. But at that time, there was the beginnings of an effort. There were pockets around the state that had efforts to align with the science of reading, but there was not yet the broad scale science of reading emphasis that the state has now adopted and moved forward. In the early days, I was advocating that we communicate a strong vision. And I'm really happy to say that when Catherine Truitt took office in North Carolina, she did something that had not yet happened in the years that I had been here, about a year and a half to 2 years before she became superintendent of education in North Carolina. And she helped bring together all the players. She was able to work with the legislators. She was able to work with the State Board of Education, and they became partners in the work. There were changes in the structure and in the advancement. And then that eventually led to policy changes. And when the policy was completely overhauled and revamped in 2021, it gave us the foundation that we needed to move the work forward at a stronger pace and with more buy-in, quite honestly. And so it was really exciting to see that new vision be cast in the state. And again, that's where I talk about, I learned both in Mississippi and I saw the importance in North Carolina as well, that when you have strong leadership and you communicate a clear vision, and then you can get buy-in from the different stakeholders that are critical to the work, it can make all the difference. States who struggle to get to that place, and even districts who may struggle to get to the place of a shared vision, can continue to struggle, not just on the policy piece, but on the implementation piece.
Wow. So that was going to be one of my next questions, which, some of the similarities between the states. I'm hearing, leadership, strong vision, communication of that vision, and really getting all of the players involved sound like some similarities that were successful. Were there any differences between the states when you think about whether the size or the population, or is that something people need to maybe put less emphasis on and think about the principles of those, that change process that you mentioned? Did you see any differences between the states and anything that others can maybe learn from?
I think scaling efforts has been really critical. Mississippi, we had challenges, and it was, it was a monumental undertaking. But when you look at student populations, Mississippi is probably about a quarter of the student population to North Carolina, and North Carolina is a much bigger state. I think it's like 12 to 14 hours to go a diagonal line from in the Outer Banks over to the what would be the southwest corner of the state. It's quite a large landscape. Not just the distance across the state, but the landscape to make change. The state did a really good job. Even prior to the change in legislation, they had a decentralized effort for the Department of Ed which is the Department of Public Instruction in North Carolina. And with that, they had regional consultants that were around the state. And that was for both early literacy, the literacy efforts, as well as them for some other initiatives for the State Department. And that proved to be really critical to be able to have a presence in the different regions across the state and someone who was on the ground and could communicate, but also had the connection back to the department. So I think that those types of efforts were helpful. And then I think another thing that really made a difference in the early years after the legislation was overhauled in 2021, we saw that policy change and strengthen to include all of the essential components of a comprehensive early literacy policy that ExcelinEd promotes. And with that change in policy and the improvement that happened, we saw that we were able to raise up those pockets around the state, some of the districts that were moving forward ahead of the state and had already implemented science of reading training for their teachers. They were already looking at high quality instructional materials adoption and how they could better align their instructional materials with the science. And so putting spotlights on some of those front runners was a really critical piece of what we were doing, and learning lessons from them as well, taking from them what they had learned in their efforts and then helping to amplify that and to be proactive in supporting other districts and being able to have a plan to move forward effectively.
That's such an important piece about the scale, right? And I didn't realize North Carolina was quite so big, 12 to 14 hours. Here in New England, you'd be down to Washington, D.C. by then, leaving from Boston for 12 hours or maybe even further. But so that idea of scale is important. But what you said was really interesting in terms of the wide variety of stages of where they are in terms of their openness to change. Maybe some of them were already doing some of the things that are really important, like you said, high quality materials, professional learning for their teachers. And you talked about the regional support, but always having that connection back to the state, because I think there's always this, I hear a lot of this push and pull of, local control, or, states don't want to mandate something because the districts want control themselves. But what I heard you talk about, and maybe you could expand on this just a bit, is that idea of there is some element of local, whether it's control or local personalization, if you will, but it's always coming back to that centralized vision and that overarching plan. Was I understanding that correctly? Or can you talk about the challenges that some districts or states feel in terms of that local control concept?
We work with state leaders in a network at ExcelinEd. We have the Early Literacy Network. And so we have 37 states and DC that are a part of that network. And we support and bring together state leaders of literacy from across the nation. And that collaborative work and effort is so critical. And we learn so much. And it's such a wonderful group of state leaders. But one of the topics that often arises is the issue of local control. And we don't think that local control has to be completely removed. We're not trying to take that away. But what we do know is that when there is guided decision making and districts are supported by state efforts, it can make all the difference. Rather than a single district and every district in the state having to convene their own panel, equip them and train them, and then go through a reliability and validity process to evaluate curriculum. It's so much more empowering if the state takes on that effort and then helps provide a list that says, we have vetted these resources. These are strong instructional materials. And if you choose from this list, then you're going to be better aligned with the science of reading, and maybe policy, depending on the state. But that empowers districts. It doesn't remove their choice or their local control. It actually empowers them. And I worked with a number of districts who would say, when is the state going to help us with this? When will they? So a lot of times districts are asking for that support. So I think that we want to certainly allow districts to customize for their population, for their environment and their landscape where they are. But I think that guided decision-making and support effort can happen at the state level that empower districts to be stronger and to do better for all kids.
Absolutely. And like you said, that having the expertise, if each single district had to spin up a committee and all of that reliability work, I think that's an excellent way to think about it because, like you said, we're not trying to take local control away, but help empower those local teams to have some resources and align with the mission, which I love. So you started to talk a little bit about your current work at ExcelinEd. Can you tell us a little bit more about your current work in ExcelinEd's mission?
Absolutely. So at ExcelinEd, we believe in policy solutions, and we can kind of group that into three main buckets: increasing student learning, eliminating inequities, and then readying graduates for college and career. And so in the area that I work in, which is focused on literacy, we are hard at work on many things to help both advance and support policy efforts. As part of the policy team, we're striving to help stakeholders word policy well and ensure that the policies that they move forward are worded as well as possible so that they can be most effective. And then also we look at supporting states in implementation efforts once policy is passed. So some of the things that we have been hard at work on, earlyliteracymatters.org is a website that we launched in 2023. Initially, it was a policy scan that looked at the policy adoptions for early literacy across all 50 states. In 2024, with a challenge from our CEO, we amplified that work and we dug in to look at implementation. So we took our 18 fundamental principles of a comprehensive early literacy policy, and we looked at each state's implementation efforts in relation to policy that had been adopted for their state. And we tried to look at whether they had adopted the policy, and if it was adopted, was it implemented partially? Was it fully implemented? Or was it potentially maybe adopted but not yet implemented, so it had a future date or timeline for implementation? So we did that for all 50 states. We are now in the process of updating that website to reflect all of the 2024 actions so that we'll be ready to go and support action for the 2025 legislative year. And then we also we launched a new piece of that website this year called Parent Tools Raising a Reader, and it shares different resources that can support parents who are seeking to help their children become strong readers, things that they can do in the home. And we were very intentional about trying to cultivate resources that were parent-friendly and not so heavy in jargon that might be intimidating or confusing for parents. So that piece of our website is now available and was launched in November. And then we took on a new project this year in 2024. We love a project on our team. And
I was going to say, in your spare time, another project.
But, and I will say, we overwork ourselves at times, but it's because of our passion to be a support to the nation. And so this new project is called Fundamentals of Literacy Coaching. We launched the first part of it. It's modules 1 through 3 in July, and it's a training for literacy coaches. Some of the things that we learned in Mississippi and then in the work that we've done across the nation, we tried to cultivate some of that learning. And then we also partnered with the Florida Center for Reading Research in the development of that. And the Florida Literacy Coach endorsement process had been launched, I guess, maybe last year. It's been in place maybe a little over a year now. And they were gracious to share the work that they had done with us And so in partnership with FCRR, we have put forth those modules, and we're really excited. We're about to release the 4th through 6th modules. And then we hope to even be able to offer a train the trainer for state leaders that would be next year in 2025. We have funding to do that, and to help create a situation where states can advance these modules with some fidelity by training trainers that can return to their state and equip their leaders there. And finally, we just released a Science of Reading professional learning rubric. And that's to support states when they're looking at Science of Reading training for their educators. We know that there are different qualities of training, and different programs include different things. So we tried to look carefully at what are the essentials, like what do teachers really need to know to be able to transform their instruction in the classroom. And then, of course, we believe that coaching is an important part of helping teachers transfer what they learn into the classroom. So the rubric followed up with the literacy coaching modules. We feel like we're putting forth some really important work that can help support states and districts as they work to grow their own, to develop their professionals, and ultimately to change the trajectory of reading for kids.
Wow, that is just amazing. And so I just want to kind of go back through all of those and talk a little bit more. And what I'm going to share with our listeners is that all of the amazing tools and websites that Casey just mentioned, we will put in our show notes so that you can go back to them. The first one being earlyliteracymatters.org, where you can go and check out any of the 50 states and where they are in their implementation. I love that. I think there's even a map component to that.
Yes, there's a map of the nation, and you can actually filter by our 18 fundamental principles of an early literacy policy, so that you can look at different states, which policies they've adopted, and where they are even in implementation. So if states are looking for models, or they're looking to see other people that might have advanced solutions around that particular principle, they can find that easily through the map.
Wow, that is amazing. And to keep that updated, as you said, you always have to continuously update with all the new policies coming into place. And then the resource for parents. Parents are always looking for the parent, toolbox that you mentioned. That's another amazing resource that's part of that Early Literacy Matters website, right, under the resources. And then the coaching piece, working with FCRR, and I know some of my former colleagues, Kevin Smith and Lori Lee, it is so important to think about, now that they have this knowledge, right? You talked about in the next thing, I'll connect the two, because you talked about the rubric around professional learning, which is amazing. Is that one is released, or that one's coming?
It is released. It can be found on our ExcelinEd website.
Okay, so again, we'll put the link to that in the show notes as well. And thinking about, the important components of professional learning, and making sure that you're building teacher knowledge, right? It's often hard to think about, okay, how do we assess if they're applying that knowledge, or how do we help them apply that knowledge? And that's where that coaching piece comes in. So to your point, that kind of partnering with professional learning and the coaching models. And you mentioned that you're working on with the coaching models. So the current coaching models are for training coaches, literacy coaches.
Yes.
And then you're working on, or it exists already, the train the trainer model
So
for
we
states?
we will host an event and invite our states to send 1 to 2 representatives from their state who will be training literacy coaches. And it's primarily aimed at state cadres of coaches, but it could be a district initiative as well if there is not one at the state level. But the goal would be that we equip some of their personnel to be able to be strong trainers of those fundamentals of literacy coaching modules within their state so that they have access to continue it with fidelity. And it actually is a response to a request from some of our ELN members, our Early Literacy Network with ExcelinEd. We included them in a review process of the fundamentals of literacy coaching modules 1 through 3. And some of the feedback that they gave us, they were so excited about the materials, but they said, we want to be sure that we do this with fidelity. Will you train our people? And so that led us to elevate that request to our executive leadership at ExcelinEd. And they were very, very accommodating and willing to help make that happen. And then we had a funder who expressed interest, and our development team helped put all that together. And so we anticipate being able to offer that in the spring.
So you mentioned 4 to 6 was released or is coming. That's module number 4 to 6 or grade level 4 to 6?
Yes, it's modules 4 through 6, the remainder of the training for the fundamentals of early literacy coaching. And that should be released any day now. By the time this airs, we expect to have it available for states and districts to use.
Great. And so for our listeners, we'll make any updates in the show notes if it differs from the time of this recording. Your work at ExcelinEd is focused around early literacy. What trends are you seeing in literacy policy or literacy in general for adolescent literacy?
So post-pandemic, of course, we all saw the need to support students in developing their reading skills and strengthening the opportunities that they had for instruction aligned to the science of reading and cultivating strong literacy skills. We knew that the impact would carry forward from the interruption that happened with learning during the pandemic. And we started thinking about how can we support those learners that are already beyond third grade. North Carolina, when they overhauled their policy in 2021 for literacy, they actually extended their supports through 5th grade. So that was an early model for that. Then Virginia passed an adolescent literacy policy in 2023, and Indiana did so just this year in 2024. Florida also has been a model. They have had some elements of adolescent literacy support already embedded with their Just Read Florida initiative for many years. But we know that reading problems, as much as we would love to say that we've solutioned them by 3rd grade, it just isn't true for all students. And so we believe that it's essential to support adolescents in achieving the skills that they may not have developed in the prime years of elementary school. And so part of that means that teachers in the upper grade levels need to have some understanding of how to identify these kids. Then what do you do with them? And more often than not, and as a former middle school teacher, I was seeking support and how to help students who were struggling readers access the content. And then being a middle school interventionist at one point in my career, I know how critical it is for us to support those students where they are and help fill the gaps for them to be successful in the future. And so we did publish a model policy for adolescent literacy last year in 2023. And we actually have been hard at work on some adolescent literacy resources during this year, 2024, that should be released in the near future. But we know that it's critical that states look beyond just that 3rd and 4th grade piece to be sure that we're supporting all students who need an opportunity to improve their literacy skills.
I love that. This idea, you're right, everybody focuses on grade 3, including putting all their, quote unquote, good teachers in third grade, but we know we really need to start in kindergarten.
Absolutely.
And also that we can't stop in third grade because there's so many students who did not develop the skills they needed. So I love that you guys created elements of a policy that can be directed towards those adolescent teachers. And when you think about professional learning, you often hear middle school or high school teachers say, I'm not a reading teacher, I'm a social studies teacher, I'm a science teacher. But I feel like every teacher is a reading teacher because we know that about 85% of all curriculum is presented through reading. And so it is important that we don't forget, we're not trying to make all of them reading experts, but just different things like morphology or, syllable division, little things that they could weave into their practice is so important. So I'm excited for our listeners to be able to learn from those policies directed at adolescent literacy, the older learners, which is great. And you mentioned, post pandemic, have you really seen a shift, whether in, early literacy or adolescent literacy since the pandemic? Has anything beyond the obvious of it kind of put a spotlight on the literacy in this country, but are there other elements that you have seen shift since the pandemic?
I think so. I think that some of the things that I believe were impacted is parent awareness, stakeholder awareness, parents watching their students learn from home in remote learning situations. They got that front row seat to what was happening. And I think it led to questions for some parents. And I think that policymakers have been responsive to the parent outcries that have come. I also think that the pandemic created an urgency that perhaps was not as strong. Not that it shouldn't have been, because we weren't in a great place with reading across the nation prior to the pandemic. But I think that it provided a new spotlight that led to a higher level of responsiveness than we'd seen, and that urgency led to momentum. I think Emily Hanford's podcast, Sold a Story, also her ability to communicate the need and the crisis in very relatable ways, I think has helped highlight the need and led to more stakeholders responding to it. So those things all play together to create an environment where there's a strong appetite to ensure that we're doing all that we can to give every child the opportunity to develop strong reading skills.
Absolutely. And Emily was actually my very first guest on the podcast. I think her podcast, putting it in very relatable terms, but really highlighting what you also said about parents having that front row seat during the pandemic in a way that parent-teacher conferences really didn't allow for before. So absolutely. I think in that sense of urgency, we've certainly seen that with the number of folks who have adopted, whether it's letters or other professional learning, started to review their curriculum for the science of reading. It has created this awareness, because we were in that same spot before the pandemic, but just not as many people knew about it. And now it seems to be more mainstream. When you think about policy, oftentimes people feel like policy is maybe just putting more things on my plate. What elements are critical that you you have seen in different policies, how can it not feel like it's just one more thing I'm being asked to do, but making it really relevant and feel and get that buy-in? What are those components that really are so critical? And we have to help teachers understand this is not just one more thing on their plate.
Well, I think at ExcelinEd, we strive to promote a preventative model so that we're starting from the earliest grades. Some states even adopt supports for pre-K prior to ever arriving at kindergarten to help students be as ready as they can when they arrive. But regardless of where their policy begins and ends, it should incorporate supports for teachers and policy, assessment, and parent notification. That assessment piece is so critical. We don't want to overassess kids by any means, but we want to identify kids. And if we can't identify them, then we don't know how to support them and ensure that they get the help that they need. So that identification piece through universal screening is critical. And then including the parents, notifying them, and then how we're going to support those students with interventions. And first of all, really high quality instruction. So instruction and intervention are another critical bucket. And then retention and intensive intervention is important when students haven't achieved what they need and they've had a preventative model that has provided support throughout those early years. Then a third grade retention for students who aren't able to demonstrate the skills they need to move on. That extra year we consider an intensive intervention year. It shouldn't look the same as their previous third grade year or any other year. It should include some additional support, a teacher who has a proven track record, as well as in intervention time, ensuring that they're getting support in every way possible so that they can move on with their peers in the future and be able to be successful in those coming grades. But when we can pull together a comprehensive package that includes the essential components from all of those 4 buckets, then we know that it's proven more successful. Mississippi is an example. We use Florida as an example, and ensuring that we equip our teachers and then we support them in transferring the learning from the science of reading into the practice in the classroom. Through coaching, literacy coaches are a great support to help support that transfer of learning. And then also one of the pieces that we've seen other states strive for is ensuring that EPPs, our educator preparation programs, are aligning with the science of reading, and that the coursework is equipping our new teachers that are just moving into the career to be effective from day one. When we can align our programs and ensure that they get that training before they ever arrive in the classroom, then we're not having to retrain after. And so that benefits everyone. I think when we are looking at elements that transform, we know that the teacher matters. And so we have to be sure that we do the best we can to put high quality teachers who are equipped to teach reading and ensure students all get the opportunity to have that teacher and benefit from the learning, and then also have access to high quality instructional materials so that the teacher has what they need to support the learning in the classroom. Those are some of the critical pieces. As I mentioned before, the identification piece and then intervening. Those are all essential. Summer reading camps can be another way to support students who may be struggling, but ensuring that all of our materials are aligned with the evidence and that our knowledge base is as well is going to take us much further.
When I was at FCRR as the director of intervention, I often got the question, what is the best intervention? And I would always say prevention. So I love your first point about, your policies are really preventative in nature. And trying to catch them before they fall. But then for those who are in the upper grades, right, who maybe didn't have all of these high quality instructional materials and things like that, making sure you have intense intervention and knowledgeable teachers. There is actually work, Shane Piasta and others looked at the statistical interaction between the knowledgeable teacher and instruction based in the science of reading. So there is that power in that 1-2 punch, so to speak. So, and again, I think assessment gets a really bad rap. During the No Child Left Behind era, there was often the joke of no child left untested. But that's true only if, I always say, you have to make sure you know what question you're trying to answer with the data before you give the test. And one of the things that it can help you do is identify where the students are, where the intensity of intervention is needed, but then also what area of focus during that intervention. So all great things, and the work that ExcelinEd and you are doing is just, it's amazing. And all of these resources, again, we're going to make sure are in our show notes. So one last question. I always begin with the same question and end with the same question for all my guests. So there's plenty of challenges in the classroom and at the state level, but there's also tremendous forward momentum. So what makes you most hopeful for the future of literacy in this country?
For a number of years, I have believed that literacy delayed is literacy denied. And so I have been really excited about the momentum that has built in recent years towards advancing the science of reading and ensuring that all children are being the recipients of high quality instruction that is based on what we know from science about how the brain learns to read and how we grow strong readers. I think that one of the compelling things for me in my first year with the Mississippi Initiative, I was coaching in several schools, but one of the 30-year veteran teachers came to me, and she was not happy that she was going to have to spend some really intensive time in the training modules for the science of reading and then go to some face-to-face sessions. And she's like, I'm at the end of my career. I'm preparing for retirement. I'm just, trying to do the best I can before that. And I just encouraged her to please go, please participate, that it would be worth her while. And I assured her that, that I felt confident that she would be glad that she did. And she finished the first part and did the face-to-face training. And she came to me afterward in tears. And she said, I have been teaching for 30 years and I never knew. I never knew what I didn't know. And she said that she would be continuing to teach, but she would be doing things differently. And so I think that is not a singular story. I have heard it from so many people across the nation. I hear it even as parents learn, whether it's through Sold a Story or through different initiatives. I hear from policymakers as they start to learn about the reading science and what it means and why students aren't becoming readers when they're receiving instruction. As we build awareness, that momentum continues to grow. And I think that we are at a place that I've never witnessed. And I remember the first, early swings in the early stages of my career where it was debated about the approach to teaching literacy. But I never saw the type of momentum that we have now. And I think the fact that it is bringing together a cross-section of stakeholders that have not only taken an interest, but they've taken action. And I think that is a really powerful piece that has the potential to change the trajectory for our students long term.
Absolutely. And I love that story. I agree. It's not a singular teacher. I myself had that experience. I hadn't been teaching for 30 years, but a long time, and I didn't even know what I didn't know. It wasn't until I went back to become a speech language pathologist and reading specialist that I learned, and just the guilt and the shame, and that's one of the big things that I'm constantly reminding us all, that it's not a blame game about these teachers or principals, or even, I used to also say, well, it's our higher ed, institution, but those professors are also teaching what they were taught. So let's all put the blame aside. And but I do know those feelings are real of oh my gosh, I let down my students. But that, Maya Angelou, we say it almost on every episode now, that we know better, we're going to do better. And so I love hearing all of that. Thank you for sharing that story, because it is so important and such an emotional thing for teachers. Again, as they move forward, but having the support from all the stakeholders, as you said, and the momentum is just phenomenal right now. So I'm excited as well. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule, all these amazing things you're working on. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you, Liz. It's a pleasure to be a part of the conversation. And as you can tell, I hope I'm very passionate about the work. And so I thank you for shining a spotlight on the things that are happening for literacy, and opportunities to advance it and keep this momentum going.
Absolutely. And so thanks so much, listeners, for joining Casey and me today on the All for Literacy podcasts. The conversations we're having with educators across the country are crucial in shaping the future of literacy education. And we hope today's episode sparked new ideas and insights for you as we look forward to 2025. As always, we'd love to hear what's happening in your classroom or community, what challenges, successes, or questions are shaping your approach to literacy. So please join the conversation with us on LinkedIn. Our profiles are linked in the podcast description, and we'd be excited to hear from you. So together we can ensure that every student has access to the literacy education they deserve. And thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of All for Literacy podcast.